Hey everybody, welcome back to Perspectify. Uh, this is a very close to my heart episode, Dhruv, and I'm
Hmm.
sure it's the same thing with you as well,
Hmm.
because it's something that we have tried to learn a lot in the last, since the time we started working. There is no clear resources out there which would
Hmm.
essentially help marketers and product people in really understanding how to look at data.
Yeah. No, correct. I mean, I remember that a few, almost I think a month or two back, we had actually had a discussion about all the trends when it comes to analytics per se, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think I asked you sort of what's the way you were sort of going about doing data analytics, and I think you told me a lot of interesting insights that I personally hadn't even known. For example, just to quote one, right? I think the fact that code interpreter on ChatGPT is now enabling, easing data analytics a lot is was something that I used, and I think something that the moment you told me, I think I told everybody in my company, and I was like pretty much shocked. Yeah, this is
Hmm.
insane, right? And I think I told my
Hmm.
VP analytics guy, and I think he's also like shocked,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Just curious, right? So, how did your journey with data become, or with analytics? Like,
Hmm.
what? I'm sure you look at data, right? Again,
Correct,
you
correct.
look at multiple data at
Absolutely.
your company. So, how what was your journey around it?
No, absolutely. I mean, uh, from a marketing perspective, I mean, most of my work has been very marketing generalist. So I usually
Hmm.
dabble in a lot of aspects, and data happens to be one
Hmm.
of the core aspects because again, that's
Hmm.
something that enables a lot of decision making on some of the
Hmm.
more senior levels also, right? I think
Hmm. Hmm.
when you are trying to, let's say, forecast data or probably check what sort of work
Hmm.
for you, what hasn't worked for you.
Hmm.
I think regularly looking at data has been one of the key pillars for us. And
Hmm.
I personally haven't ever been someone that's like, if you remember this, I think back in school when we were still in 11th, 12th,
Hmm.
I sucked
Hmm.
at statistics. Like I
Yeah.
absolutely sucked at it. Okay, like I
Hmm.
was horrible.
Hmm.
I scored like a
Hmm.
60% or something, and I basically
Hmm.
some almost sort of flunked the exam, right?
Hmm.
And I remember, like, I never enjoyed any data work.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
absolutely hated
Hmm.
it. And I think one of the
Yeah.
things with this the whole curriculums is the way they teach it, and the actual implications of it is like
Yeah.
completely different, right? So like that's where, I mean,
Correct.
I started off at it as a very sucky person, but
Hmm.
somewhere I think while we started working, at least in my company, I realized that what, we need to make a lot of decisions based on concrete
Hmm.
data points, and
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
what brought me into some base level analytics, right? So I have, for
Yeah.
example, I haven't actually used a lot of, I think I think in your case, you've still dabbled in the likes of SQL and
Hmm.
all also for actually bringing a lot of
Hmm.
data. But I mostly,
Hmm.
work with Excel.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's pretty much about
Hmm.
me, right? I
Yeah.
think you're
Yeah.
someone that's actually worked in the core data domain since you're exactly linked with product, right? So I think
Yeah.
you'd be
Yeah.
someone who would be able to give a lot more insight, and I think
Hmm.
would be really interesting to sort of ask you questions and get a lot of perspective from you as well, right? So how has your journey been so far in the data field?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it would be both of us who sucked at statistics in school and in college, right? And the funny part is that it's probably the most important thing that's there. Like if you study statistics well when you're in college, you act that is one of the core useful skills that you're actually learning in school and college, which you can directly apply in your marketing and product jobs. So really terrible. It's really terrible the way they teach statistics, because it is a very interesting topic, right? And it can be helpful if you look at it in the right way, and probably that's what we'll talk about in this episode, right? But just to sort of give a quick background on how I started working in data, and how
Hmm.
I sort of dabbled into data, right? So in my first company, we didn't really look at any data, and because
Hmm.
it was a relatively new company, we did not have a
Hmm.
lot of users. So it was easy
Hmm.
for us to talk to people and understand ki, "Hi, yaar, this is something that's working,
Hmm.
this is something that's not working." Right? When you get more and more users, or when you get more and more people onto your platform, I feel that it's important to, one, continue to talk to those people, but at the end of the day, right, it's not very scalable, right, in terms
Hmm.
of here, what, let's say you talk to 100 people, right, or 10 people,
Hmm.
you'll obviously get some kind of a insight, or you'll get some
Correct.
kind of a direction. But
Hmm.
to actually prove ki, "Ha, yaar, what I'm thinking is right or not," right,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
need
yeah.
to, I feel that you should have some kind of data backing it.
Correct.
So that's been my journey. I have
Hmm.
so because we were commerce students, we did not really know anything about SQL. I did not know anything about SQL.
Hmm.
I barely knew Excel. I did not know most of these flashy analytics tools out there, right? So most of my
Hmm.
learning has probably been through actual experience,
Hmm.
working and understanding how to look at data, what data to look at, what to not look at, which is extremely important over the
Correct.
last 3 4 years.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct, yeah, absolutely. So I think, how I'd want to approach this conversation is, again, I won't, because as I said, I still consider myself, junior to mid in the whole data field, right?
Hmm.
I have a person who actually handles data in my company,
Hmm.
so he knows it way better.
Hmm.
But I think just for as a newbie, right?
Hmm.
Like I think the fundamental thing I struggle with
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
that I never sort of I've struggled with the fact that I can't follow data trends a lot, right? Like not even
Hmm.
data trends, more like analytics trends, like
Hmm.
right,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
what's the new thing that's making research easier, or what's the new thing that's sort of giving you more insight into what's working on a landing page or probably an
Hmm.
app, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
think. As I said, right, I want to approach this conversation where I probably ask you questions and you give
Hmm.
me some more insight into what sort of worked with you, right?
Sure.
And to
Sure.
start with, right, I mean, how does one follow data analytic trends, right? Like that's what I've
Hmm.
struggled with, like for me.
Sure. So I think the number one reason, like that's a really good question, right? Everyone wants to jump to this new thing that's going on, right? Ki, "Ha, yaar, this is a new way of measuring things, or this is a new way of looking at things," right? But fundamentally, where I sort of differ from this whole trend ka journey is the fact that you need to look at base, like you need to have a very, very first principles approach when you're looking at data,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
You looking at too
And
much
what do you
data.
mean by first principles for like the
Sure. So
uninitiated people?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So the number one issue which I early on faced was here, there's just too many things to look at, right?
Hmm.
There's
Exactly. Correct.
hundred different things to look at, right? And then and the moment you start looking at those 100 different things, right, you sort of lose. Ki, "Ha, yaar, I need to look at this. This is showing this," and then everything starts going for a toss, right? So I don't think one should, like, if you have a product or if you're owning like a part of business, right? So I don't think you
Hmm.
should look at like 10 or 100 different things, right? You should probably do max to max. You should look at max to max 3 to 5 things, right? So I'll give you an example. Let's take an example of, say, Netflix, right? So when you're Netflix and let's say your primary goal is to increase the revenue of Netflix, right? You won't
Hmm.
look at कि हाँ यार कौन सी एक्शन मूवी कोई देख रहा है, right?
Hmm.
Or what's the watch time for this anime series, right? What you'll
Hmm.
probably need
Hmm.
to look on a broader level is ki, what's my average watch time, right? When are
Hmm.
my
Hmm.
users coming? So point
Hmm.
here is that you need to look at like two or three of the most important
Hmm.
metrics. You need to identify them first in your business or in
Hmm.
your product, and then sort of double down into, "Hi, yaar, how can I efficiently look at this, right? And what is
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
and what is the frequency of looking at it, right? So for example, if if let's say you're selling, I don't know, let's take an example of car, okay? If you're a car company, okay, a person will not decide to buy a car in, say, 2 days or a day, right? So looking at it daily probably doesn't make sense. Matlab,
Hmm.
looking at it from an outsider's perspective, probably looking at daily trends मतलब आपको डेली
Hmm.
ट्रेंड्स देखकर ये पता चल जाएगा डायरेक्शनली वेर यू आर गोइंग दैट मंथ, बट आई थिंक व्हाट
Correct.
शुड एसेंशियली लुक एट इज कि यार मंथ ऑन मंथ कितना है या क्वार्टर ऑन क्वार्टर कितना
Hmm.
है, बिकॉज what I feel is people generally take like 2-3 weeks of minimum time to essentially buy or
Hmm.
choose a vehicle, right? So number one would be identifying out of those 100 things what are like the two or three needle moving things that you need to actually look at. The second would be
Hmm.
कि किस frequency में data देखना है. So looking at it
Hmm.
on a daily basis, looking at it on a weekly basis, what's the trend that you should be looking at, and then finally and then the third part, which was your question कि यार analytics में trends क्या होते हैं, right? So I think
Hmm.
uh, rather than looking at trends is कि how can you efficiently मतलब a better question to ask would be कि how can you efficiently look at that data, right? So
Hmm.
you can download an Excel or you can make a dashboard. I think वहां पर trending चीजों का ज्यादा benefit होता है, because for
Hmm.
example as you said, right, the code interpreter thing, it's not it won't help you look at the right things. You need to prompt
Yeah.
चैट जीपीटी कि यार ये डेटा
Hmm.
देखकर मेरे को बताओ, राइट? बट एट द एंड ऑफ
Correct.
द डे, तो बट एंड चैट जीपीटी डज इट एफिशिएंटली फॉर यू, राइट? सो आई थिंक you need to, and this is coming from our previous conversation. If you guys haven't watched it, I would really suggest you watch the whole AI wala episode, right? Where you are the
Hmm.
co-pilot, right? You are the co-pilot and you're just determining कि हाँ यार this is what needs to be looked at, and then you figure out कि हाँ यार इसे मैं और efficiently कैसे देखूं, कितना और देखूं, किस frequency
Hmm.
पे
Hmm.
देखूं,
Hmm.
इसमें और मेरे को क्या nuances लेकर आने हैं, what do I want to understand more, etc etc. So yeah, that's that.
Correct. That's actually very useful, because I think if you say that, if you boil it down into, let's say, you know what, if you're, let's say, a product person, okay,
Hmm,
and you're looking at, let's say, I don't know, month on month, let's say, app downloads,
hmm,
right?
hmm,
So
hmm,
again, the first two three metrics again for you might be that, okay, what is sort of the volume of users coming
hmm,
in on a
hmm,
monthly basis? What are the sort of downloads coming in?
hmm,
And then probably trying to follow trends related to, let's say, download download analytics, or
yeah,
let's say
hmm,
whatever, all the sort of things that come with, the whole app level analytics,
hmm,
trying to follow those trends and then
hmm.
sort of doubling down on that, right?
So I
That's
think
a very useful.
I
Hmm.
I think इसमें भी ना मतलब I gave a cap on 3 to 5 metrics, but I think I should give a minimum of, let's say, मतलब एक एक metric हमेशा नहीं देखना चाहिए. There should always, you
Hmm.
should look at least two or three metrics at once, right? So as you said, the
Agree.
problem with just looking at app downloads is कि आप app downloads देख
Hmm.
रहे हो और सिर्फ आप वो देखकर अगर खुश हो रहे हो, but you're not measuring the week on week or month on month retention on your product, then something
Hmm.
there, मतलब आप लेकर तो आ रहे हो लोगों को, but nobody is using it, right? So I think
Correct.
you need to sort of look at two contrarian metrics or two different metrics to
Hmm.
really get the picture of how things are going. Yeah.
That makes sense. That's useful, right? Although, I would differ on one point. This just in my case, right? I think you said very correctly that, what, just looking at one day level or daily level wouldn't probably give you a holistic picture. But in my case, right, what I've realized is that, uh, at least from a data standpoint, I have become obsessed with, let's say in my case, my whole metric would be, okay, track demand generation, right? Check out channels of acquisition, those kind of things. So what I did, instead of looking at it on a weekly or monthly level, is look at it so frequently. So I, for example, look at it as soon as I wake up and as soon as I go to bed. Honestly, right? I have this habit, and I wouldn't say it's the best habit. Okay, like some of my friends have called me out saying, "Why tu raat ko lead mat check kar," you know. But I think because I've inculcated this habit of looking at it on a daily level, also, I am able to instinctively spot issues and, differences. Right? Like, okay, there's some bug that's come on the website or something. I can instantly tell that something is wrong because I know instinctively that, the volume of users coming in or something like that has changed, right? So I think even though, from a strictly analytical standpoint, conclusive conclusive decisions can be made from broader level data. I think just if you want to get really close to data and really, get, like, get your hands dirty with the core of analytics, right? I think looking at it on a daily level is not necessarily useful for determining decisions, but just developing an instinct of finding issues faster and knowing what's working also. That's what's worked for me. I might be completely wrong.
That's exactly what I meant. As you said, as you correctly said, it can only help you figure out if things are broken faster, right? But if you figure out कि हाँ यार आज जो है फॉर एग्जांपल मेरा लेट्स से ऐप का ट्रैफिक डाउन है या कुछ है ठीक है यू सी कि हाँ बस एवरी इफ एवरीथिंग्स वर्किंग फाइन नॉट वर्किंग फाइन वट एवर दैट इज इफ एवरीथिंग्स वर्किंग फाइन आई थिंक एक्टिंग ऑन इट एंड चेंजिंग अ फ्यू थिंग्स कि नहीं यार ये आज कैसे नंबर कम हो गया कल तो ज्यादा था एंड ऑल ऑफ दोस थिंग्स is I feel a wrong metric. Is I feel can be a little bit you know मतलब disastrous in some ways because तुम एक decision लोगे based on one day of looking at data, right? And you realize कि यार ये तो backfire कर गया है अब मेरा पूरा मतलब पूरे महीने का demand.
Now, the second question I have is, let's take it as a funnel, right? Let's go top to bottom of, let's say, the whole
Hmm,
product funnel or even the marketing funnel, just like a generalistic funnel. Ki matlab,
hmm,
theek hai,
hmm,
demand, sort of
hmm,
acquisition comes in, customer comes in,
hmm, hmm,
goes through
hmm,
the whole product and probably becomes a, sort of,
hmm,
basically you make a sale, right?
hmm,
Now,
hmm, hmm,
if you have to break down tools like analytics tools on all these
hmm,
three levels, right? Like directly
hmm,
top of the
hmm, hmm.
funnel acquisition,
Yeah,
medium,
yeah,
matlab through the journey, and then
yeah,
final sale.
yeah,
What would be
yeah.
the relevant tools that's like you or me could be using, or someone who's listening to the podcast would be using? Because again, you have worked with all
Hmm.
these tools. I would probably
Yeah.
just give a suggestion ki, theek hai, from the top of the funnel, something like a GA4 would probably give you a base level idea, right? So
Hmm,
what
hmm,
would your
hmm.
opinion be on that?
Yeah, honestly, like I'm probably biased, but I've
Hmm.
tried using GA, right, Google Analytics,
Oh, it sucks.
and
I'm not saying it's good. I'm
it is
not
the
saying it's
most
good.
suckiest, it's the worst thing that you can use for you. If you're a small startup, probably it makes sense to save money.
Correct.
But the moment you start getting some users and you have some scale, I feel that there are a lot of better tools out there instead
Hmm.
of GA. Some of them can be say web engage, you
Hmm.
have indicative, you have mix panel, you have all of these
Hmm.
tools, right? You can
Hmm.
use any of them, and honestly, like all of them are decent enough. They're good enough for analyzing any kind of data, right? Or most kinds of data. But what I would sort of be wary of that there is a statistical, matlab, it'll be approximately 95% correct in most cases
Correct.
there would be a
Hmm.
5% difference, right? So one way to look at is कि हाँ यार you track literally everything of how people are behaving in your product through these tools, right? The other thing which is less known or is sort of underrated is if you can create data dashboards uh, by using your backend system and using SQL, right? So,
Hmm.
for example, if you want to measure कि हाँ यार these were the number of people who landed on my website or downloaded my app, right? So you can keep events which are backend driven, which essentially means you store your data in a database and then you make dashboards around it. So that will be much better in terms
Hmm.
of giving you a more accurate data, right? At the end
Correct.
of the day. But of course, if you can't do that, or if you don't know how to do that, I feel that these tools are good enough to measure everything.
Hmm.
If you want to go a bit deeper into all of those things, I feel SQL is a tool that you can use to measure
Hmm.
right from everything, matlab, to accurately measure everything. So I think fundamentally, one should learn SQL. It is very, very simple. It can be on the job. You can learn you can use SQL to build your own data dashboards. There are tools out there like Redash and all of those tools
Hmm.
where you can or Tableau where you can build these data dashboards. But at the end of the day, I think at मतलब अगर आपको funnel analysis करना है, so I think a combination of SQL and your product analytics tools like
Hmm.
Mixpanel are enough for you.
And again, I think given I mean with the tools you mentioned, just giving some brief about which tool would be useful for what, right? For example, I think
Hmm.
in the past I've consulted you. You know what that what would your recommendation be? Should we
Hmm.
use MS Clarity or should we use Hotjar?
Hmm.
Right? Like
Hmm.
you gave me some direction there. So what maybe give some more
Sure.
context on
Sure.
what's been working in for which tool, right?
Yeah. So अगर if you want to look at funnels, right? So you have
Hmm.
these product analytics का tool, right? If you want to get a deeper level of understanding of
Hmm.
let's say how your users are behaving in terms of measuring long-term retention, getting very accurate data, you can build dashboard using MySQL. And then finally, agar, as you said, right? Uh, you have MS Clarity, which you can use, Hotjar, which you can use to essentially figure out
Hmm.
कि हाँ यार, how are your users behaving on your website. Although I'm not
Hmm.
very sure how those tools are useful in the sense that they can give you a directional sense. ठीक है, कि heat map
Hmm. Hmm.
saving and all of those.
Correct.
They'll give you all of those things. But I personally haven't found that very useful unless you have a different opinion about in
No,
marketing.
I sort of share the same opinion. It's funny that we are talking about this because I think when we sort of implemented some of these tools, I think
Hmm.
the same issue sort of arose that there's not a lot of insight that you're sort of getting from it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Unless maybe you're operating a very heavy e-commerce website, which has layers and layers of things to look at, and okay, how are people going from here to here? I feel if you have a relatively simple website or something like that, it
Hmm.
won't offer you a lot of insight, some basic level of things. And also, even if it does offer you insight, the problem sometimes is just that what do we even do with this, right? Or let's say
Yeah,
that okay, at some point you realize that scroll rate
yeah,
is zero after this point. You could
yeah,
probably say that what, let's shift all the elements to the top. But in
yeah,
that case, what
yeah.
you're like,
Your
I
design
can't
goes
do
for the
that
top.
because yeah, I
Your
mean,
design goes for
you
the top.
can't implement everything that analytics also tells you, right?
Hmm.
So I think that is
So
that is sort
coming
of
to
one
the
fundamental
yeah,
flaw.
yeah, exactly. So coming to the fundamental reason, right? Fundamental जो मैंने चीज बताया था, figuring out कि हाँ यार, what are like the top 2 3 things, and then
Hmm.
just implementing those top 2 3 things, मतलब just seeing those top 2 3 things with your eyes is I think
Hmm.
more than enough. You don't have to go, मतलब unless you're some sort of a Google or you're some sort of a YouTube where you
Hmm.
have some amazing level of data insights and you
Hmm.
can matlab, even a 0.5% increase in anything is like a massive increase on an overall basis, right? So unless you're on that level, I don't know, looking at each and every matlab, page ka scroll rate and all of those things, I don't know,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
I personally haven't found that useful.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So I completely agree with you. Although I think for GA4, it's more useful from a marketing standpoint. I don't
Hmm.
know how much you have looked at it more from, let's say, okay, how much
Hmm.
or how well a campaign is performed. It
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
give you good amount of insight at
Hmm.
times, although the whole product level of it is like
Hmm.
pretty
Yeah,
useless. Like even to build funnels
yeah,
on
yeah,
the
yeah.
GA4, it's
It's
like I've
terrible.
tried it and I've gone over and over it, and I've never found a lot of useful things to kind of and it's also like
Hmm.
horribly slow for me,
Yeah. So
right?
I think
So I
the
think
reason why I think marketers like to use GA4, and correct me if I'm wrong, is to basically figure out attribution level things, right? Ki, if if
correct,
100
absolutely,
people are
absolutely,
coming,
absolutely. Yes,
yeah, yeah.
yes. So basically, figure from an acquisition standpoint, from a
Hmm.
top of the funnel standpoint, definitely what's the channels that are working, what are the mediums that are working. You get some insight into conversion rates. So I mean, that's as far as that goes, which is actually useful for marketers regardless, but not extremely, not to the point that you can depend on it holistically just to
You can.
kind of derive
Uh, so
derive conclusions.
if you have let's say if you're using these analytics software like Mixpanel and all, right? So
Hmm.
if you create a link, let's say, ठीक है, a one link or something like that, where you keep an UTM attribute or UTM
Correct.
parameter as this as XYZ, so it'll give you a pretty good level of attribution आपको उससे दिख जाएगा, so you don't even have to use
Hmm.
GA for that. So yeah, I think
Hmm. Hmm.
I honestly think that GA Google Analytics is one of the worst products that Google has
Hmm.
released.
Yeah, Google's products are as slow as they get. I mean,
No,
to be
but
honest, like
if
with every update, it gets slower. I've not seen it becoming any better. But
no,
yeah, more features for the most part.
but if you have used Firebase, I don't know if you have used Firebase or not. So I think that's like a
Hmm.
pretty powerful tool that Google has created to do all
Hmm.
kinds of multivariate testing, A/B testing, right? So
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
very
Hmm.
simple.
Hmm.
You can create like very good experiments, or not good experiments. You can
Hmm.
create experiments pretty fast, and it'll give you a very conclusive result, right? So I think
Hmm.
that's like as a marketer, I think you can use it, and anyone who's working in product or working in marketing, if you want to do any kind of
Hmm.
an A/B testing, right? Rather than
Hmm. Hmm.
looking
Hmm.
at
Hmm.
Hotjar, it's better कि हाँ यार आप A/B testing करो and see कि हाँ
Hmm.
यार
Hmm.
what's working, what's not working. So
I
in
thought
that case,
Firebase was mostly for app level data, but just correct me if I'm wrong. I might completely
yeah,
have it
absolutely.
completely wrong.
So it is for app level data, but it is
Okay.
used. It gives you an app level data, but you can run a lot of
Hmm.
experiments on it if you have implemented it
Got it.
properly. You can
Got it.
literally, मतलब you can literally put parameters. ठीक है कि
Hmm. Hmm.
let's say there is a copy that you show and you put it on Firebase. What you can essentially do is that there's a section called remote config, right? You can go to
Hmm.
that section. You can run an A/B test with copy A versus copy B and see कि किसका CTR better है. And all of that would be
Hmm.
done by, मतलब, let's say you run it for 30% of the users, right? So it'll tell you, मतलब
Hmm.
it'll randomly distribute it to users कि हाँ यार ये 30% है, ये 70% है.
Correct. Correct.
So it's pretty,
No, that's yeah. I mean, how typical A/B testing works,
yeah,
right?
it's
Makes
very
sense.
good, very good.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And I think I think this is going to be a super crisp episode also, but I think just one last question that I personally have,
Hmm.
had is, so I think you obviously mentioned that, okay, you can, if you figured out, these other metrics that you want to look at, you could probably read
Hmm.
more about them. But
Hmm.
again, where do I read? What platform should I follow? For example, should I follow X,
Hmm.
Twitter previously?
Hmm.
Should I look at LinkedIn? Any books, any resources that you would provide for
Hmm.
someone to look at a regular,
Hmm.
maybe regular basis to
Hmm.
just keep up with the trends?
So yeah, as I said, मतलब if you want to learn how to essentially look at data faster, ठीक है, what you can use and all of those things. So obviously उसके अंदर X में there's a lot of AI stuff which is happening, a lot of
Hmm.
मतलब and you the fastest way to get that information is either through X or through Reddit, right? But what I feel is that if you really want to understand data and how to look at the right sets of data, it's super important that number one, you know your business, you know your customer, and you know the cyclicity of your business to essentially figure out ki what are the data metrics to look at in each cycle, right? And at the end of the day, if you want to read about ki how did other
Hmm.
companies sort of implement different data strategies, there are a bunch of podcasts on product and marketing. So there is one which I highly recommend. His YouTube channel is his name is Lenny, and his podcast is Lenny's podcast. He has a newsletter.
Hmm.
His one of his blogs was about Duolingo, which is pretty
Hmm.
amazing in terms of how they use data to essentially figure out where the retention problem was, right? So I think as marketers and product people, we don't we like our job shouldn't be to look at each and everything in data, right? You should know कि,
Hmm.
हाँ, these are the two things or three things that I need to look at, and these are the things that I need to improve. And your time should probably be spent once you've figured out those two, three things, right? Your time should be spent on strategizing कि हाँ यार, how do I increase this from X to 10X?
Hmm. Hmm.
That I think मतलब if you're not doing that and if you're just constantly looking at
Hmm.
data, I don't think it's useful. And that's my personal opinion.
Correct. Now, I think that's a fundamental mistake most people have been making, that they look at, what's been working for
Yeah.
them and just sort of, enjoy the
Yeah,
things that have
exactly.
worked and sort of look down upon things that have not worked, but don't actually go beyond that to implement something
Yeah.
that, they could. use on a wider scale,
Yeah,
right? So I think that's obviously one of the most important thing,
yeah. And I think
which makes
this is
sense.
sort of end the note, right? So I was listening to this interview slash podcast by this guy called Alak Pandey, right? So he
Uh-huh.
said a very
Uh-huh.
interesting thing, and I think Nitin Kamath has also said a very interesting thing, right? That that data सब करते रहते हैं, right? But
Mm-hmm.
most data analysts or most product analysts in my opinion, have been brought into company to basically give that confirmation bias because data can be manipulated,
Mm-hmm.
right? कि हाँ यार, is it an X% increase? I can make X% look like it was मतलब 1% का growth. I can make it look like 100% growth,
Mm-hmm.
right? I
Correct.
can look at, let's say, only 10% of the users, 10% of the top 10% of the users and say कि हाँ यार मेरा product तो amazing है, right? So uh, looking at data is one thing, but understanding ki हाँ यार, at the end of the day, is my business improving? Are my customers more happier?
Mm-hmm.
All of those things are
Mm-hmm.
super, super important, and not just
Mm-hmm.
looking at data in silo.
Correct. Absolutely. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. That's a wrap on the episode. Right? I think this was super interesting, and maybe giving a brief. I mean, this the whole agenda of this episode was that give a brief on data analytics as a topic, how someone starts with it. Again, as Rakshit said, probably go about understanding what are the vital areas of the business that data drives, trying to double down on those trends by sort of looking at it on a monthly, weekly, or a more broader level, and obviously a lot of interesting tools and tips also given throughout the episode that we probably drop in the show notes, as soon as we record this whole podcast, right? And yeah, I mean, obviously going ahead, we probably do a lot more specific niche episodes on maybe how you could analyze landing pages, how you could probably look at analytics, as Rakshit said, look at Firebase and probably determine a lot of interesting points out of that, right? And yeah, I think that's pretty much a wrap, right?
Absolutely. If you like this episode, please share it with your friends. Share it on LinkedIn because apparently things are going viral over there. So share it on LinkedIn, share it with your friends, and yeah, if you have any feedback, put it down in the comments below and let us know what you want us to talk about next.
Absolutely. So that's all from us today, folks. Thank you for listening. This is me, Dhruv, and
Rakshit signing off.
all right, take care. Have a good day. Bye bye.